The hatching pits of Prime smelled like sulfur and wet stone. Commander stood at the edge of the viewing platform, her human lungs burning slightly from the volcanic air. She had been stationed here for 6 months as a diplomatic observer, watching the go about their ancient traditions. She had seen many things that confused her, many things that amazed her, but nothing had prepared her for this. Below her, in a massive stone chamber lit by rivers of flowing lava, thousands of dragon eggs were cracking open. The shells were beautiful things, each one the size of a small car, covered in patterns that glowed like dying stars. The hatchlings that emerged were even more beautiful. They had scales of gold and silver and deep crimson. They had wings that stretched wide and caught the hot air currents. They had eyes that burned with ancient fire. And they were sorting them like defective products on a factory line. Watched as tall, scaled officials walked among the newborn dragons. They carried scanning devices and data pads. They measured wingspans and checked scale patterns. They examined teeth and tested fire glands. And when they found a hatchling that did not meet their standards, they painted a black mark on its forehead and moved on. "What happens to the marked ones?" asked the ambassador beside her. Ambassador did not look at her. His golden eyes remained fixed on the ceremony below. "They are returned to the fire," he said simply. "It is mercy. A flawed dragon cannot bond, cannot serve, cannot find purpose. We spare them a life of emptiness." Felt something cold settle in her stomach. "You kill them." "We release them." His voice held no emotion. "The culling has been our way for 10,000 years. Only the worthy may carry our warriors into battle. Only the perfect may bond with noble houses. This is how we built an empire across 12 star systems. This is how we remain strong." Below, the sorting continued. A hatchling with one wing smaller than the other received a black mark. Another with scales that were too pale, almost transparent, was marked as well. A third breathed only smoke instead of fire. Mark, mark, mark. Counted them 23, then 40, then 57. The marked hatchlings were herded into a separate pit. They stumbled and cried out in confusion. They did not understand why they were being pushed away from their brothers and sisters. They did not understand why the warmth of the main chamber was being to them. They only knew that something was wrong. "How many?" asked. Her voice sounded strange to her own ears. "This season's yield is strong. Only 73 will be culled, less than 4%. A very good year." 73. Stared at the rejection pit. 73 baby dragons, some of them still wet from their eggs, huddled together in the cold stone chamber. In 1 hour, plasma vents would open beneath them. In 1 hour, they would be ash. She thought about her grandmother back on Earth. The old woman had been born with a twisted spine. Doctors had said she would never walk. She had run marathons until she was 70 years old. She thought about her brother, who had been born deaf. He was now one of the best pilots in the fleet, reading vibrations and instrument panels better than any hearing person could. She thought about her own daughter, who struggled with words but could solve mathematical equations that made professors weep. Flawed, imperfect, unworthy. The words meant nothing. They had never meant anything. "I want them," said. Ambassador finally turned to look at her. His expression was unreadable. "I do not understand." "The marked ones, the culled ones, I want to claim them." For a long moment, simply stared at her. Then his mouth opened in what had learned was laughter. It was a harsh sound, like stones grinding together. "Commander, you are joking." "I am not." "You cannot be serious. These hatchlings are defective. They will not bond with warriors. They certainly will not bond with a human. You have no fire in your blood. You have no scales on your skin. You are soft, weak. No dragon would accept you as a partner." Thought about pointing out that humans had their own kind of fire, that softness and weakness were not the same thing. But she had learned that arguing with it was like arguing with a mountain. So instead, she simply said, Galactic law states that any unbonded dragon may be claimed by any willing party if no other claims exist. Is this not correct? His amusement faded, his eyes narrowed. You know our laws. I know all laws. It is my job to know them. The other noble houses will not claim these hatchlings. They are worthless, but you cannot simply take them. There are procedures, bonding contracts, legal requirements. Then bring me the contracts. The ambassador stared at her for another long moment. Then he turned and spoke rapidly to an aide. The aide rushed away and returned minutes later with a stack of data pads. Sign them all. 73 contracts, 73 lives. The airy master, a massive with scales and one blind eye, came to watch her sign the final document. He looked at her the way one might look at a child who had just agreed to carry a mountain on her back. Human, he said slowly, do you understand what you have done? These dragons will never fly in formation. They will never breathe fire in unison. They will never carry warriors into glory. They are broken. Put down the data pad. She looked at the rejection pit, where 73 hatchlings were still crying in confusion and fear. One of them, a small thing with only one functional wing, was trying to comfort the others. It pressed its body against its frightened siblings, offering what little warmth it had. Maybe, said quietly, I do not want them to fly in formation. Maybe I do not care about glory. Maybe I just want them to live. The airy master shook his head. They will die anyway, slowly and painfully instead of quickly and mercifully. You are not saving them. You are only extending their suffering. Looked at him then, really looked at him. She saw the certainty in his face, the absolute conviction that he was right, and she felt something that might have been pity. I have learned something in my years among the stars, she said. The universe is very good at telling us what is impossible, and we humans are very good at not listening. She walked down the stone steps toward the rejection pit. Behind her, the watched in silence. Before her, 73 pairs of frightened eyes turned to look at the strange, soft, scaleless creature approaching them. The small one-winged hatchling limped forward. It sniffed her hand, and then, very slowly, it pressed its head against her palm. Smiled. Hello, little one, she whispered. I am going to take you home. The old mining station had been abandoned for 30 years. It sat in the fringe, a forgotten corner of space where nobody went unless they were running from something or looking for something that did not want to be found. Had bought it for almost nothing. The previous owners had been happy to get rid of it. Now, 6 months later, it was home to 73 dragons and 47 humans who had come from across the galaxy to help. The first weeks had been chaos. The dragons were confused and frightened. They did not understand why they had been taken from the only world they knew. They did not understand why these strange, soft creatures were trying to feed them and care for them. Some of them refused to eat. Some of them hid in the darkest corners of the station and would not come out. Some of them cried through the night, making sounds that broke the hearts of everyone who heard them. But humans were stubborn creatures, and had gathered the most stubborn humans she could find. Doctor was a who had spent 20 years studying alien species. She learned to read the dragon's body language within the first week. She could tell when they were hungry, when they were scared, when they were sick, when they just wanted to be left alone. She treated their wounds and cured their infections and held them when they trembled in the dark. Had been a soldier once. Now he was a gentle giant who sang old earth lullabies to dragons who could not sleep. His voice was deep and warm, and the dragons would gather around him at night, pressing close to feel the vibrations of his songs in their bones. Little Sarah was only 12 years old. Her parents had died in a colony accident, and she had nowhere else to go. She attached herself to the one-winged hatchling that had first touched in the rejection pit. She named him. She became his shadow, and he became hers. The sent observers to watch. They came every month, recording everything with their scanners and data pads. They were waiting for the dragons to die. They were waiting to document the failure of this foolish human experiment. They took notes on every cough, every stumble, every moment of weakness. They did not take notes on the moments of strength. His left wing had never developed properly. The bones were too short, the membrane too thin. A dragon master would have seen this as a death sentence. A dragon that could not fly was a dragon without purpose. But Sarah saw something different. She saw that his legs were stronger than any other dragon's. She saw that he could run faster, jump higher, climb better. His body had compensated for his weak wing by developing muscles that no normal dragon possessed. "He does not need to fly like the others," Sarah told one day. "He can fly his own way." They built him a brace. It took 3 months and 17 failed attempts. The final version was made of lightweight metal and smart fabric that responded to his movements. It could not make his wing whole, but it could catch air. It could let him glide. The first time glided from the top of the cargo bay to the floor, Sarah screamed with joy, roared with something that might have been pride, and the observer simply stared, his stylus frozen above his data pad. Was another problem. Her fire gland was damaged. When she tried to breathe fire like the other dragons, only smoke came out. Thick, black, choking smoke that filled whatever room she was in. They saw this as a shameful defect. A dragon without fire was like a warrior without a weapon. But Old had been a soldier. He knew that communication won more battles than weapons ever could. He taught to control her smoke. Short puffs for yes, long streams for no, patterns and shapes for more complex ideas. Within a year, could communicate more clearly than any other dragon in the sanctuary, and the other dragons learned to read her signals. Suddenly, the broken flight had a communication system that no electronic jamming could disrupt. They could talk to each other across vast distances, through storms and interference, in situations where normal communications would fail. The blind dragons were perhaps the greatest surprise. 13 hatchlings had been born without functional eyes. They had marked them without hesitation. What use was a blind dragon? How could it fight? How could it fly? Doctor discovered that their hearing was extraordinary. They could detect sounds that no other creature could hear. They could build a picture of the world through echoes and vibrations. She gave them small devices that produced sonic pulses, and the blind dragons learned to navigate by sound better than sighted dragons navigated by sight. And then there was Ghost. Ghost was the dragon with transparent scales. Among such a dragon was considered cursed. Invisibility meant you were meant to be unseen, meant to be forgotten, meant to be nothing. Ghost had been the last hatchling marked for culling. She had not cried or fought. She had simply accepted her fate with quiet resignation. For the first year at the sanctuary, Ghost barely moved. She ate little. She spoke to no one. She seemed to be waiting to disappear completely. It was herself who finally reached her. "They told you that being unseen was a curse," said one night, sitting beside Ghost in the dark observation deck. "They told you that invisibility meant worthlessness, but I wonder if they were afraid." Ghost turned her great head slightly. Her eyes, which were the same color as her scales, reflected the distant stars. "I think," continued, "that they marked you for death because they could not control you. A dragon that cannot be seen cannot be commanded, cannot be predicted, cannot be put in formation and pointed at enemies like a weapon." She paused. "What if invisibility is not a curse at all? What if it is the greatest gift a dragon could have?" Ghost was silent for a long time. Then, slowly, her scales began to shift. They caught the starlight and bent it around her body until she was almost impossible to see. She moved across the observation deck without making a sound. She passed within inches of without disturbing a single molecule of air. When she became visible again, there was something different in her eyes, something that might have been hope. "Teach me," Ghost said. It was the first time she had spoken in months. And smiled, "We will learn together." By the end of the second year, the observers stopped coming. There was nothing left for them to record. The dragons were supposed to be dying. The dragons were supposed to be failures. Instead, the dragons were becoming something new. Something the galaxy had never seen before. Something that would change everything. The collective came from the dark spaces between galaxies. Nobody knew who had built them or why. They were machines, but they were also something more. They thought, they learned, they adapted, and they consumed. They took their first colony world in 3 days, their second in 2. By the time they reached the third, the Imperium had mobilized its full military might. 10,000 bonded dragons, the pride of 12 star systems, launched into battle against the machine intelligence. It was a slaughter. They fought the way they had always fought. Their dragons flew in perfect formation, breathing fire in synchronized waves, moving as one unified force. It was beautiful. It was deadly. And they had learned to counter it within the first hour. The machines analyzed the patterns. They predicted the movements. They calculated exactly where each dragon would be and exactly when it would strike. And then they simply were not there when the fire came. Instead, they were behind the formations, cutting them apart with precision weapons that never missed. They were above, dropping bombs that the synchronized dragons could not avoid because avoiding them would break formation. They were below, launching missiles that tracked heat signatures and found their targets with terrible accuracy. The dragons fought bravely. They died quickly. 3 months later, the Imperium had lost half its military strength. They were advancing on Prime itself, and an emissary arrived at the fringe. Her name was, and she was the daughter of the very airy master who had laughed at 3 years ago. She came in a small ship, alone, with no weapons and no guards. She came because she had heard rumors, impossible rumors, stories of broken dragons who did not die, stories of humans who had taught them to fight in ways no had ever imagined. She came because she was desperate. Met her at the docking bay, looked at the human woman and saw someone who had changed. The soft diplomatic was gone. In her place stood a commander who had built something extraordinary from nothing. "I need to see them," said. "The dragons, the broken ones." Nodded slowly. "They are not broken, but yes, you can see them." She led through the station to the main training hall. What they saw there made her stop and stare in silence. The dragons were fighting, but they were not fighting the way dragons fought. Led a ground assault team. He ran along the walls and ceiling of the training space, using his powerful legs to launch himself at targets from angles that should have been impossible. His modified wing brace let him glide and change direction in midair. He hit a practice drone, destroyed it, and landed on another wall before the debris had even touched the ground. Above him, the blind dragons moved through a field of jamming drones. The drones were producing electronic noise that would have blinded any sensor, but the dragons navigated by sound. They wove between obstacles that they could not see, striking targets with perfect accuracy, guided by nothing but echoes and the sonic beacons worn by their human partners. Hovered at the center of the chaos, producing streams and puffs of smoke that the other dragons read instantly. She was coordinating the entire battle without saying a word. No radio signals, no electronic communications, nothing that they could intercept or jam. And Ghost was invisible. Watched as a practice target suddenly exploded, then another, then another. There was no visible attacker, there was no warning, there was only destruction appearing from nowhere. When Ghost finally allowed herself to be seen, she was standing directly behind. They jumped back in shock. She had not heard the dragon approach. She had not sensed anything at all. "Impossible," whispered. "This is impossible." Smiled slightly. "Humans hear that word often. We have learned to ignore it." They sat together in his office and talked for hours, explained the war, the losses, the way they seemed to predict every move the Imperium made. the growing terror among the people as their perfect military failed again and again. "We cannot beat them," admitted. Her voice was hollow with defeat. "They know what we are going to do before we do it, our formations, our tactics, our strategies. They were developed over 10,000 years. They are perfect, and they have learned to counter perfection." "Then stop being perfect," said simply. Stared at her. "What?" "Your strength has become your weakness. They can predict you because you are predictable. You fly in formation. You strike in synchronized waves. You do everything exactly the same way every time." Leaned forward. "My dragons do not fly in formation. They cannot. They were never taught the old ways. Each of them fights according to their own nature, their own strengths, their own instincts. There is no pattern to predict. There is no formation to break." "But that is chaos," protested. "How can you win battles with chaos?" "You call it chaos, I call it adaptation." Stood and walked to the window. Outside in the training hall the dragons were still practicing, still learning, still growing. They are machines. They are brilliant at pattern recognition and prediction, but they struggle with things that have no pattern. They cannot predict what they cannot understand. She turned back to, "Your perfect dragons are dying because they are perfect. My flawed dragons are surviving because they are not." Was quiet for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was very small. "The Airy Masters will never accept this. They will never admit that their ways are wrong. They will never allow broken dragons to fight alongside the pure ones." "Then they will die," said. There was no cruelty in her voice, only truth. "And the will take everything unless—" "Unless what?" Smiled. It was not a happy smile. It was the smile of someone who had been waiting for this moment for 3 long years. "Unless someone shows them what broken dragons can really do." Prime was burning. They had come with everything they had. A fleet of 10,000 machine ships filled the sky like a metal storm. Their weapons turned the ancient stone cities to rubble. Their soldiers, endless waves of steel and circuit, marched through streets that had stood for 10,000 years. The great Ares, where generations of dragons had hatched and bonded and learned to fly, were tombs now. Smoke rose from their shattered domes. The bodies of perfect dragons lay scattered across the ceremonial grounds, their scales still beautiful even in death. The military had fought with everything they had, and they had lost. High Admiral stood on the bridge of his command ship, watching his world die. He had spent 50 years climbing the ranks of the Imperium. He had led hundreds of battles. He had never known defeat. Now defeat was all he knew. "Sir," his communications officer said quietly, "we are receiving a transmission from the fringe." Closed his eyes. The humans. The mad human woman who had taken the reject hatchlings. He had heard the reports from. He had dismissed them as desperation and fantasy. What could 73 broken dragons do against the machine tide that had crushed 10,000 perfect ones? "Put it through," he said. His face appeared on the screen. Behind her could see movement, dragons, humans, preparation for something. "We are coming," said simply. "Do not try to coordinate with us. Do not try to give us orders. Just try to stay out of our way." The transmission ended. Stared at the blank screen. Then he laughed. It was not a happy laugh. It was the laugh of a man who had nothing left to lose. The broken flight arrived 20 minutes later. They did not come in formation. They did not announce themselves with ceremonial fanfare. They simply appeared from hyperspace in 73 different places, at 73 different angles, in a pattern that had no pattern at all. The tactical systems immediately tried to analyze the new arrivals. They ran probability calculations. They searched for formations. They looked for the patterns that would tell them how to predict and counter these new enemies. They found nothing. Hit the first walker at full speed. He did not glide gracefully down from above like a proper dragon. He ran along the side of a burning building, launched himself sideways, and crashed into the machine's sensor array with enough force to crack its armor. Before the walker could react, he was gone, climbing the next building, preparing for another impossible attack. The blind dragons struck next. They flew through the jamming field like it was not there. The machines had filled the air with electronic noise, confident that it would blind any approaching enemy. But the dragons navigated by sound. They heard the jamming. They heard the weapons charging. They heard the slight hum of the engines. They heard everything. 12 gunships exploded in the space of 30 seconds. They never saw what hit them. Rose above the battlefield, her smoke streaming behind her in complex patterns. The other dragons read her signals instantly. Attack here. Avoid there. Target moving left. Reinforcements coming from the east. They tried to intercept the communications. They tried to decode the patterns in the smoke. But it was not a code. It was a language born from years of trust and practice between creatures who had learned to understand each other without words. There was nothing to decode. There was nothing to predict. There was only chaos, and the machines could not fight chaos. And then Ghost arrived at the flagship. The massive ship hung in orbit above Prime, directing the entire invasion. Its shields were impenetrable. Its weapons could destroy a moon. Its sensors could detect a single grain of sand from 1,000 miles away. It could not detect Ghost. She moved through the void like a whisper. Her transparent scales bent light around her body. Her movements were so slow and careful that she produced no heat signature, no electronic signature, no signature of any kind. To the ship's sensors, she simply did not exist. She landed on the hull. She found an access port. She slipped inside. The soldiers who guarded the interior never saw her coming. One moment the corridor was empty. The next moment they were destroyed, cut apart by claws they never knew were there. Ghost moved through the flagship like a phantom. She destroyed communication hubs. She wrecked navigation systems. She tore apart the cooling systems that kept the central processor from overheating. And then she found the core. It was a massive thing, pulsing with cold light, the brain of the entire collective. Millions of calculations per second, millions of predictions, millions of strategies all running at once. Ghost looked at it for a long moment. Then she raised her claw and brought it down. The flagship died. The fleet lost coordination. Ships crashed into each other. Weapons fired at nothing. The perfect machine army became a confused mess of individual units with no central command. On the ground, the broken flight pressed their advantage, led the ground forces in attacks that came from everywhere at once. The blind dragons picked off isolated units with surgical precision, coordinated it all, her smoke signals guiding her siblings through the chaos. By sunset they were retreating. By midnight they were gone. Prime was saved. The next morning, the airy master came to where the broken flight had gathered. He was old and tired, and his scales were cracked from years of service. He had spent his entire life believing in the way of perfection. He had signed the death warrants for thousands of dragons he deemed unworthy. Now he stood before 73 of those dragons, 73 creatures he had marked for death, 73 lives he would have ended without a second thought. He looked at the one-winged dragon who had destroyed more than any perfect warrior. He looked at the blind dragons who could see better with their ears than any sighted creature. He looked at whose smoke had been worth more than any fire. He looked at Ghost, who had killed a god. And slowly, painfully, the airy master knelt. "Forgive me," he whispered. "Forgive us all, we did not understand." Looked at him for a long time. There was no anger in his eyes, no satisfaction, only a deep, quiet wisdom. Then he lowered his head and touched his snout to the old's forehead, a gesture of acceptance, a gesture of peace. Behind them, the sun rose over a world that had been saved by the broken, the flawed, and the forgotten. The war ended not with a final battle but with a quiet surrender. The collective, having lost its central command and its ability to predict its enemies, simply stopped fighting. Some of the machine fleets drifted into deep space, their purpose gone. Others powered down where they stood, waiting for orders that would never come. A few, strange as it seemed, asked to negotiate. They wanted to understand how they had been defeated. They could not explain it to them. They barely understood it themselves. But things began to change. 3 months after the Battle of Hollow Sun, the Imperial Council abolished the culling. It was not an easy decision. Many of the old guard fought against it. They argued that tradition must be preserved. They argued that the victory had been a lucky accident. They argued that allowing flawed dragons to live would weaken the Imperium in the long run. Ambassador, who had once laughed its foolishness, stood before the council and spoke for 2 hours. He told them about who could not fly but could run faster than any dragon in history. He told them about the blind dragons who navigated by sound. He told them about Ghost, who had killed a god made of steel and light. He told them about humans, strange, soft, stubborn humans who saw value where saw waste. The vote was close, but in the end the culling died. The first hatching season under the new law was chaos. Airy masters who had spent their entire lives sorting hatchlings suddenly had no purpose. Some of them adapted, some of them could not. But the hatchlings who would have been marked for death now lived. They would never be perfect. They would never fly in formation. But they would have the chance to become something else. Human advisors came to the great Ares. Doctor arrived first, teaching them how to treat conditions they had always considered untreatable, came with his songs and his gentle hands. Sarah came too, now 16 years old, with walking proudly at her side. She had grown into a teacher, showing young handlers how to see their dragons as partners instead of weapons. Was offered everything, titles that had never been given to a non, lands that stretched across entire continents, a seat on the Imperial Council itself. The airy master, the same one who had knelt before, came to her personally with the offers. She refused them all. I did not do this for glory, she told him. I did not do this for power. I did it because 73 bobbies were crying in a pit, waiting to die, and I could not let that happen. Then what do you want? The airy master asked. Smiled, I want to go home. She returned to the fringe. The old mining station was bigger now. New sections had been added. New ships came and went every day, because the word had spread, not just among them but across the galaxy. Other species had their own cullings. Other cultures had their own ideas about what made a life worth living, and many of them had begun to question those ideas. The first egg from outside the Imperium arrived 3 weeks after its return. It came from the hegemony, a species of beings who destroyed any offspring that did not match their ideal genetic patterns. The egg contained a larva with an extra set of limbs, worthless by standards, marked for destruction. Accepted it without hesitation. More came, dragon eggs from distant colonies, hatchlings from species that had no name in human language, creatures that had been rejected by their own kind for reasons that seemed ridiculous to human eyes. Too small, too slow, wrong color, wrong shape, wrong in ways that only mattered to those who had decided that there was only one right way to be. The sanctuary grew. 73 became 200, 200 became 500. The fringe was no longer a forgotten corner of space. It was becoming a beacon. One evening, 5 years after the Battle of Hollow Sun, stood on the observation deck and watched the ships come in. Another delivery, more rejected lives, more chances. Ghost landed beside her. The dragon was larger now, fully grown, her scales shimmering like starlight on water. She had become something of a legend, the invisible dragon who had killed a god, but she still preferred the quiet moments here, watching the stars with the human who had first told her that invisibility was a gift. They still do not understand, said softly. Though the council, all of them, they think we fixed these dragons, made them useful despite their flaws, turned waste into weapons. Ghost tilted her great head. Her eyes, the same transparent color as her scales, reflected the distant lights of incoming ships. "That is not what we did at all," continued. "We did not fix anything. We did not make them into something different. We just stopped telling them they were wrong." She paused. "They were never broken, Ghost. None of them were. The galaxy just had not learned to see what they really were." Ghost made a low rumbling sound. Agreement, understanding. Across the sanctuary, dragons roared. The strong and the blind and the brilliant, the forgotten and the found. Each of them different. Each of them flawed by someone's definition. Each of them exactly what they were supposed to be. Was there, teaching young dragons how to use their legs instead of their wings. Was there, her smoke painting messages across the evening sky. The blind dragons were there, their sonic beacons creating music that only they could hear. And new faces, new stories, new lives that someone somewhere had decided were not worth living. Watch them all. She thought about her grandmother who had run marathons with a twisted spine. She thought about her brother who flew starships without hearing a sound. She thought about her daughter, now grown, now working at a university on Earth, teaching others to see value in difference. She thought about 73 Bobbies crying in a pit, waiting for plasma fire that never came. "You know," she said to Ghost, "when I claimed you, everyone told me I was wasting my time. They said you would die. They said I was prolonging suffering. They said I understood nothing about dragons or bonding or purpose." Ghost waited. Smiled. It was a tired smile, but there was peace in it. "I think maybe that was true. I understood nothing about the old ways. I only understood one thing." She paused. "Every life matters. Every soul deserves a chance. And there is no such thing as a flaw that cannot become a gift if only someone believes in it enough." Ghost pressed her great head against his shoulder, a gesture of love, a gesture of thanks, a gesture that said everything that words could never say. Below them, the sanctuary hummed with life. Above them, the stars burned in the endless dark. And somewhere out there, in the vast galaxy full of creatures who sorted their children and killed their imperfect and threw away their broken, more ships were coming. More lives to save, more gifts to discover, more proof that the universe was wrong about what it meant to be whole. The work would never be finished, but that was all right. Some work was not meant to end. Some work simply grew and spread and changed everything it touched. That was the human way, and now perhaps it was becoming the way of the stars.